Welcome to the CCG Museum for this short terminology video. In this series intended for newcomers to the CCG hobby, we explain basic terms one may commonly encounter. For today's video, we will be discussing the CCG Glut. The CCG Glut of 1995 was an economic bubble that happened very soon after the release of Magic the Gathering. Considering just how insanely successful Magic was, such an event was basically inevitable, as anyone with two brain cells to rub together could see that there was gold in them thar hills. And since this was a nerd hobby, there were a lot of people with plenty of brain cells. Magic was released late 1993, and had nearly a year before seeing any competition at all. TSR, being the biggest kid on the block at the time, was able to use the resources at its disposal to get Spellfire out the door in June of 1994. A mere 3 months later, 4 more games, 3.5 more games, would be released in short order, followed by 4 more games that year. This relative trickle would soon turn into a veritable deluge, as over the course of 1995, 41 new games were released. Then again, considering how many of these games were barely disguised clones of Magic, a more sarcastic person than I could argue that the number of new games was actually much lower than 41. As you could imagine, there was simply no way any game store would be able to stock that many new games and expansions. Shelf space is always at a premium in any store, and a certain amount of that space is already going to be set aside for Magic, since store owners aren't going to throw out the number 1 on the chance that something new might sell better. Since store owners obviously couldn't stock every upcoming CCG, a lot of these games were going to be lost in the shuffle. Pun intended. Across the nation, game store owners were evaluating the upcoming games announced and judging which ones would be a good match for their regular clientele. Gaming conventions, once the domain of RPGs and wargames, were suddenly filled with dozens of companies eager to demo their CCGs to store owners in the hopes of impressing them enough to get a few boxes ordered. Some of them would be rewarded, many would fall short. While the bulk of the insanity took place in 1995, it lasted well into 1996, which saw 17 new games released. While this was a huge reduction in new games, keep in mind that many, if not most, of the games released the previous year were still trying to get their stock moved, so they weren't quite out of the picture yet. The following few years would quiet down a bit, with 1997, 1998, and 1999 all seeing fewer than 10 new games released each. From 2000 onwards, the amount of new games released each year would fluctuate, but those fluctuations would more closely match what you might expect from a healthy economy. Though keep in mind that this list is very biased towards North America. CCGs spread out pretty quickly to the rest of the world, especially Japan and Europe. Many of the more popular games were being translated to other languages, and plenty of local games that never saw English language releases came out in other countries as well. So the numbers I've quoted are smaller than they should be, but time and language barriers make tracking down accurate numbers for CCG releases around the world difficult at best. This CCG Glut might seem a bit insane looking back, but it's really not that unusual when you think about it. A new thing becoming popular will always spawn imitators of varying degrees of quality. I can remember the glut of real-time strategy games that came out on PC after Warcraft 2 and Command & Conquer made that genre of video games so popular. Do I even need to mention the glut of Doom clones that came out after id Software released their classic demon-slaying game? These trends happen not only in entertainment, but just about every section of the economy. One of the quirks of any relatively free market system is that anybody can try to imitate a successful business model, which often leads to a lot more people doing exactly that than what the market will bear. This initial bubble does create an overcrowded market, which makes things weird for both producers and consumers, but eventually some of those businesses will fail and the market will correct itself to what the customer base will support. So now you know what the CCG Glut was. Thank you for attending this terminology lesson. Please let us know in the comments what you thought of the video and what terms you might like us to explain in the future. Have fun out there, and always remember to cut the deck.